100 years. It's a good old age, especially in a young country like Canada. This year, this popular regiment is raising its glasses in toast to a gracious queen and to the traditions it has acquired during a colorful and active history. Yes, quite a lot has happened in 100 years to the Queen's Own. St. Albans Raid, the Fenian Raid, the Northwest Rebellion, the Boer War, the First World War, the Second World War, Korea, Germany with NATO forces.
I am Lieutenant Colonel W.T. Barnard, a former commanding officer of the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada. At present, I act as the regimental historian. For 2 years, I have been engaged in writing a history of the Queen's Own. Today, on the 100th anniversary of the regiment, we are to go back to the time the regiment was founded and show you its history through to the present. Age is greatly venerated by any unit. The Queen's Own is no exception to the rule. Yet seniority itself is of little value. Both in war and in peace, seniority must be coupled with service. It is our special pride that in the case of the Queen's Own, this is outstandingly so. Ever since the formation of the regiment in 1860, the men in Rifle Green have been actively involved in the protection and development of Canada. War is a dreadful thing, but so long as aggression stalks abroad, the only alternative to fighting is submitting. Canada is a proud nation, therefore she maintains armed forces, as is the Rifleman. Rifle regiments came into being when certain far-sighted men recognized the need for a better relationship between officer and man, increased mobility, and changes in tactics and concealment. The idea of maintaining discipline and at the same time encouraging initiative was introduced into rifle regiments long before it was accepted by the Army in general. Today, it is an accepted fact in every unit. Mobility was obtained in the early days by lessening the weight of equipment that a man carried and by increasing his pace. Both were necessary because rifle regiments normally acted as skirmishers or scouts, as vanguards or rear guards. During the Napoleonic Wars, when England was short of cavalry, the rifles took over some of the traditional cavalry roles. Thus, it is seen that the fast marching pace of the Queen's Own today is by no means a modern innovation. Today, the Queen's Own consists of 3 battalions. The 1st Battalion, Regular Army, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel C.H. Lithgow, is stationed at Calgary. The 2nd Battalion, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel R.J. Wilkinson, is at Soest, Germany. The 3rd Battalion, Militia, under Lieutenant Colonel R.L. Bickford, is in Toronto. The King's Royal Rifle Corps was formed in answer to the defeats suffered in America just before the 7 Years' War. The conspicuous red coat gave way to the rifle green jacket. Brass buttons were replaced by black bone buttons. Comparable changes were made in tactics and arms drill. Men were no longer treated as robots. The new ideas proved popular. Once the peacetime uniform was standardized, the years brought practically no change. The heavily ornamented hussar-type jacket suggested the early cavalry role. This full-dress jacket has been replaced for all ordinary occasions by the less expensive patrol jacket. The distinctive cross belt, however, is still retained. In the past, the whistle was used in transmitting orders. The pouch on the back carried a pair of binoculars. The Maltese Cross dates from 1821, but no one is certain as to why it was adopted. So the story goes. Behind it all lies tradition. The tradition that a lady of the royal house be Colonel-in-Chief, an appointment now graciously filled by Her Royal Highness Princess Alexandra. The tradition that officers served first in the ranks. Indeed, all the traditions that have been so prominent in 100 years of regimental life.
Tradition is the lifeblood of a famous regiment like the Queen's Own. The threads of tradition are woven into the fabric of its existence through practical experience and sometimes just by chance. One of the main traditions of the Queen's Own, or any rifle regiment for that matter, is it carries no colors in order to guard the security of movement for riflemen in the field. The battle honors are carried instead on the drums. Then again, working so far ahead of the main body of men, riflemen could not protect the colors. Rifle battalions had their origins in the 7 Years' War in America, when they fought against the French, who were frequently aided by Indians. Fighting took place in dense and trackless forests and mountains where slow-moving troops were at a heavy disadvantage against the mobility of the natives. The famous General James Wolfe selected infantrymen who could scout and skirmish, move about quickly and quietly, and use individual initiative without waiting for words of command, and who were expert shots. A battalion of these he used in the Siege of Quebec in 1759. The King's Royal Rifle Corps, with whom the Queen's Own is allied, was formed in America on Christmas Day, 1755. The unit was then styled the 60th Royal American Regiment. The idea was extended in 1800 with the formation of the Rifle Brigade. In this, Colonel Coote Manningham was the guiding spirit. Indeed, one of the oldest of riflemen's songs runs like this. Later, Sir John Moore put into effect his belief that a rifleman must be trained to use his intelligence and initiative. To attain this, the code of discipline had to be humane and just, which it became. The famous redcoats. Probably these bright targets lost many a man who otherwise might have lived to fight another day. When the scarlet jackets were changed to rifle green for all riflemen, few realized that this was the first really serious attempt at camouflage, and that the redcoat was doomed. In fact, all conspicuous apparel for active service was in time to follow the redcoat, except for dress occasions, to the mothballed trunk. The original bayonet was long and equipped with a handle for close fighting, so it was termed a sword. In rifle regiments, the command is not the customary fix bayonets, but fix swords. The carrying position of the rifle in foot regiments was called the slope. It is a relic of the days when soldiers carried long pikes. Today, he carries his rifle at the trail. This position makes him inconspicuous and always prepared for immediate action. Traditionally, infantry drill calls for exaggerated movements. Rifle drill is the opposite. No crashing or stamping. Nothing conspicuous.
Move to the right and cover face.
As speed of movement is of special necessity to rifle regiments, the ceremonial pace is 140 steps to the minute, compared with 120 for infantry and 110 for the stately guards. Stepping smartly at quick time, the battalion stationed at Calgary is inspected by the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel C.H. Lithgow. In 1837, Upper Canada experienced a rebellion led by William Lyon Mackenzie. To quell it, companies of militia were called up for service from all parts of the colony. In 1854, war broke out in the Crimea, and Great Britain became involved. He now had to look to her own defenses. An act of the legislature of the old province of Canada set up Canada's first active militia almost 20 years before Confederation. A second act in 1859 authorized the banding together of rifle companies to form a battalion. An old diary tells how the battalion marched through the streets of Toronto and was complimented officially with the remark, "You are smart enough to be called the Queen's Own." The name and title were adopted and received official recognition. Its first commander was Lieutenant Colonel W.S. Dury. The regiment was to play a never-increasing part in the development of the fast-growing colony.
The Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, originally styled the 2nd Battalion Volunteer Militia Rifles of Canada, was formed on April the 26th, 1860, from 6 of the rifle companies authorized by the Militia Act of 1855, the act which was the original basis of the Canadian Army. Officially, the regiment is the oldest rifle regiment in Canada. This, too, is a proud reminder of the fact. Regiments have been brought into being for various reasons. The Queen's Own is proud that it was organized for no other reason than that the country needed it. The British regular had gone. The gap must be filled. The Trent Affair emphasized the precarious nature of our relations with the United States, then engaged in the Civil War. From the beginning, then, internally in the Northwest Rebellion and externally in the different wars in which Canada has been engaged, the Queen's Own is indelibly associated with the history and development of our country.
Of the first 12 volunteer rifle regiments under the Militia Act of 1855, 5 are still on the Army list as line regiments. The Queen's Own Rifles of Toronto, the Victoria Rifles, Montreal, the Black Watch, Montreal, the Voltigeur, Quebec, and the Royal Regiment, Toronto. Following a 4-month tour of duty at Sarnia and Niagara during the St. Albans raid into the United States in 1864, the Queen's Own saw its first concerted action at Lime Ridge, or Ridgeway, in the Niagara Peninsula on June 2nd, 1866. The occasion was the Fenian raids into Canada, when a disgruntled force of Fenian sympathizers sought to liberate Canada from its so-called oppressors. 9 dead, 19 wounded. The Queen's Own first battle casualties. The Toronto Globe of 1866 commented on the engagement. Our fellows died to save our country from being overrun, to preserve to us institutions and laws, all, in fact, that is dear. Following participation by a detachment in the Wolseley expedition to the Red River, when rebellion burst out in 1870, the Queen's Own occupied itself in giving aid to civil authorities until 1885, when rebellion broke out again, this time in the Northwest. Under command of the famous Lieutenant Colonel W.T, the Queen's Own Rifles became part of the force that marched to the relief of Battleford, took part in the Battle of Cut Knife Creek, and finally rounded up Louis Riel, Big Bear, the Cree chief, the Indian chief Poundmaker, and other rebels. During this engagement, the Queen's Own won its first official battle honor. Great Britain called again for aid in her South African campaigns. Several Canadian contingents were sent to fight alongside British and other Empire troops. The Queen's Own was represented in all these contingents. By this time, the Queen's Own had achieved considerable fame. A British newspaper said of the South African contingent, "The Canadian militiamen are worthy to stand with the regulars." At home, the Queen's Own was strong and popular as well. Honor again came its way when in 1902, Lieutenant Colonel H.M. Pellet, later to become Major General Sir Henry Pellet, was selected to command a contingent representing Canada at the coronation of King Edward VII. A detachment of the regiment was present at the coronation of King George V on the 22nd of June, 1911. Later, in order to take part in British Army maneuvers, Sir Henry paid the expenses of the entire regiment to the mother country. This was quite an undertaking, since in 1910, the Queen's Own had become so strong through volunteer enlistments that it had been placed on a 2-battalion basis. And then, 1914, and war with Germany. Canada responded once more to the call for aid. And once more, the Queen's Own demonstrated its loyalty of 75 years. Six battalions, each commanded by a Queen's Own officer, were mobilized from the regiment. Casualties were heavy in the bloody battles on no man's land. The Queen's Own lost 47 officers and 1,207 other ranks. Of the 374 decorations won by members of the regiment, 4 were Victoria Crosses, the highest military honor bestowed for valor. Their recipients: Lieutenant Wallace Lloyd Algie, Second Lieutenant Edmund de Wind, Captain Thane Wendell McDowell, and Lieutenant Charles Smith Rutherford, M.C. 1914-1918. The Queen's Own participated in actions at Saint-Julien, Festubert, the Somme, Fleur-Courcelette, Vimy Ridge, Hill 70, Passchendaele, Amiens, Canal du Nord, Pursuit to Mons. These names will forever commemorate the scenes of some of the greatest acts of valor in history. 21 years of comparative peace were to elapse before the world again burst into flames. The peoples of the world settled down in the usual sort of manner. The Queen's Own celebrated its 75th anniversary in 1935 with a visit to its allied regiment, the Buffs of England. The world in general was fed up to the teeth with conflict and preferred not to notice the resurgence of goose-stepping. All in all, it was a quiet period in Canada. And then, the rumblings from far away grew louder. Canada at first found it hard to believe, but now there was no mistaking the signs. War again blackened the horizons of the world. The Army, which Canada placed in the field from 1939 to 1945, was, like its gallant predecessor of 1914-1918, a civilian army in the sense that it was not composed of professional soldiers. The 1st Battalion of the Queen's Own Rifles went overseas in 1941. It saw first-wave action on D-Day in Normandy and obtained even greater glory in subsequent operations along the Channel coast, in Holland, and finally Germany. From the day it left Toronto until its return in 1945, the Queen's Own had only 3 commanders: Colonel H.C. McKendrick, Brigadier J.G. Sprague, and Lieutenant Colonel S.M. Lett. The war claimed the lives of 29 Queen's Own officers and 431 other ranks. The coveted Victoria Cross was won for gallantry and devotion to duty by Sergeant Aubrey Cousins. One officer, General Ralph B. Gibson, who became Vice Chief of the General Staff in Canada, was created a Companion of the Most Noble Order of the Bath. Other honors awarded were 1 George Cross, 2 Commanders of the British Empire, 13 Order of the British Empire, and 10 Members of the British Empire. Supporting the active overseas contingent of the Queen's Own was the 2nd Battalion, organized in 1940 under command of Lieutenant Colonel Baptist Johnston. This was Canada's largest reserve battalion. The 3rd Battalion Active Service Force was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel R.H. Sankey. Lieutenant Colonel J.N. Medhurst commanded the Queen's Own 4th Battalion of the Canadian Occupation Force in Germany.
In keeping with its long history, the Queen's Own headed at the war's end to new assignments. In 1951, the regiment furnished 2 companies for the 27th Canadian Infantry Brigade for service in Europe as part of the NATO ground forces. A further and most important change came in 1953, when it was announced that the 1st Canadian Rifles, then in Germany, would become the 1st Battalion, Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, Regular Army, and that the 2nd Canadian Rifles, then in Canada, would become the 2nd Battalion, the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, Regular Army. The parent reserve unit was designated the 3rd Battalion.
The regiment's home station is at Calgary. Its 1st Colonel-in-Chief was Her Majesty Queen Mary. Its 2nd Colonel-in-Chief is her granddaughter, Her Royal Highness the Princess Alexandra of Kent. Now, in Western Canada, not too far as present distances are computed, from the place it earned its first battle honor, the Queen's Own trains against the day it may again have to arise to preserve to us institutions of laws, attachments and sympathies, hopes and aspirations, all, in fact, that is dear. Today, the Queen's Own may well look back, like a paternal grandparent, on a life well spent, and see in the grandchild great hope for the future.